We're pleased to have David Abrahams with us today. David is the independent candidate for the seat of Robertson in the upcoming federal election. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Ross.
Who is David Abrahams and why should people on the Central Coast vote for you?
Well, I've been here for 20 years. I've been here for 20 years basically as a business person and community advocate. An investment advocate. I've been working and doing things. I've attracted hundreds of millions of dollars of investment to the Central Coast, everything from call centres, telecommunications, infrastructure, roads and so on. And I believe in helping the democratic system. I've helped all sides of politics get things done on the Central Coast. However, my reflection now, particularly now at the tail end of 12 years, is there's a great deal of conflict and compromise on the Central Coast. So I thought it was time to stand up and assert an ambitious vision for the Central Coast, not a compromised vision, and a plan for the Central Coast. So that's what I'm doing.
David, what do people on the Central Coast have most to fear about the return of a coalition government or of a continuation of big party politics?
Well, I think most of us in the country, and particularly on the Central Coast, realise that 12 years, 7 prime ministerial changes from Howard to Rudd, to Gillard, to Rudd, to Abbott, to Turnbull, to Morrison. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's dysfunctional. We had 6 years of conflict inside the Labor Party, and now we've had 6 years of conflict and compromise with the LNP. And what that means on the ground here on the Central Coast is things are compromised because people are tied up in party politics. Now, to me, the NBN and the big de-investments in the NBN were we had 80% of the region signed up for the NBN in this part of the world, and in 2013 that was compromised. Contracts reportedly were paid out not to put in world-class infrastructure. Hundreds of millions of dollars was sucked out of the NBN investment to get a compromised thing and so-called faster and quicker. Well, we all know much of the Central Coast, from Kilcare to the Peninsula to Terrigal to Erina, was all deeply compromised, and the reason is party politics trumped the community.
So what's your vision for the coast? What can you do about that?
Well, the Central Coast needs a local focus. We can think nationally and internationally, globally, but act locally. And that's my vision, to put a real focus on Central Coast issues. We can do something, for example, about climate change by using that as an opportunity to first stop that silly speculative gas exploration off our beaches, to stop the silly speculative coal mine under the water supply. That is our way of acting on climate change and acting locally. But we can also do it on industry development. I mean, why we are building more and more car parks instead of investing in local businesses to grow local well-paying jobs is beyond me. And I understand that there are needs for car parks, but there are other ways of doing this to get people to and from the stations comfortably. So this is it. It's just default suburban politics. We default down to national things. We need local focus from local people. I want to empower the business and community groups on the Central Coast to take a lead. And I'll take a lead. I'll take them into Parliament. I'll take them to the departments, and we will fund things directly. And using the leverage of the crossbench, we'll deliver locally.
You've spoken previously about establishing smart city infrastructure in Gosford and the surrounding areas. What does that mean in practice?
But a smart region needs several elements, and that's part of my comprehensive plan that I've worked up over the last 3 years. The first element is we need our own Central Coast University and TAFE. Now, we need our own faculties for our own industries: tourism, environment, smart manufacturing, food production. Not sort of campuses of far-flung universities with faculty boards and industry advisory groups from Newcastle or Sydney. It's not good enough. We need our own. It's about time that we stand up for our own. So education and industrial investment are massively important, but also infrastructure. We don't need this stop-start election promise infrastructure build. Big checks for roundabouts and for ferry wharves. It's ridiculous. These things should be done immediately. The demand is there. We're a growing population and we expect higher standards. So we need a 10-year investment fund, a smart infrastructure fund, of which I will announce shortly, which will fund things as they are needed and as required. We need to get away from this dummy dud duopoly election infrastructure spend. It doesn't work because it delays everything by 4 to 3 years. It's crazy.
The coast is notorious for losing its young people to big city universities and jobs in the city. What does that promise for younger people in the area, the millennials and others in the area?
Well, I've watched, I was one of the co-founders of Youth Connections, and we trained thousands and thousands of people around this area and employed hundreds of people. However, in 2013 again, that was entirely cut. That's one of the reasons I got more involved in politics. It's an outrageously dumb decision to de-engage industry and youth. We need to get back to real skills for our industry. Our local industries are always crying out for skilled people, and yet we have decimated the TAFE system ridiculously. We've outsourced it up to the Hunter and down to Sydney. So of course, young people do leave because they want good education so that they can get good jobs. It's really crazy. So that's why a local university in TAFE is so important, because in partnership with industry, we can get things done. We can get things done really well.
David, there's an upswell of consternation in the community here about PEP 11. You referred to that earlier. What's your position on that?
Oh, look, I've been more or less leading that charge here on the Central Coast. It started, really, the resistance started in Newcastle after the exploratory seismic testing happened off Nora Head last year, in April last year. I was aware of it. I started to research it, and now we've brought that to the attention of coastal communities. Now look, it's a big deal. This is the Petroleum Exploration which off the coast. It's an outrageous speculative proposal, really is. And I've been trying to work constructively with the big parties and say, why don't we unite to go down to Canberra, talk to the Prime Minister and the Resources Minister and cancel this before it goes any further. Now the Greens have come on board and several other people have come on board. The Council has unanimously voted against it twice. The state government even voted against this. So it shouldn't be a partisan thing, but the big parties are allowing this to proceed, and they're just defaulting to the regulator. Now the regulator has a huge amount of influence whether this will go ahead. We should simply cancel the petroleum exploration permit before we kill a lot of fish, whales and dolphins in the exploratory phase, and then have oil or gas rigs off our coast in the development phase.
David, you've been involved in small business. If you're successful in May in forming a minority government, what does that mean for small business on the Central Coast?
Well, look, I've founded almost a dozen start-up small businesses, not-for-profit companies, most of them here on the Central Coast. I understand the pressures of small business. I understand there are families behind small businesses, and I also understand that those families need to be recognised for their massive contribution to our community. I mean, the Central Coast is a small business-rich community. It needs to be taken seriously. I've been disappointed on both sides of politics the way that they give platitudes to small business. Now we need to help small businesses and in fact reward them for good behaviour. So some of my policy suggestions, which I would argue in the Federal Parliament, is that we reward good behaviour in small businesses. If you employ local people and pay them their appropriate rates, you should in fact be given a reward through the tax system or some other system. I am absolutely emphatic about that. There are people doing the right thing. We should be rewarding good behaviour. Good employers are a gold asset for this region.
If you found yourself having to work with a Labor minority government, would you support the removal of franking credits for retirees?
Look, the franking credits and negative gearing policy out of the ALP is fiscally wise. However, the way they go about it is ridiculous. To cut people's planned retirements over the next few years is ridiculous. Surely this is the way that arrogance gets in the way of the big parties. You need to move, transition and allow those people to invest in other investments that will give them rewards. You can't just pull a sword down on these sort of things as is proposed. You need to give people a chance to transition out of it.
If you were to give effect to this vision, David, you'd have to work with other independents and other members of the crossbench in a minority government with either the ALP or the LNP. Can you do that?
Absolutely. A strong crossbench. I dream of a strong crossbench of 8 to 12 people in a 150-seat parliament. That will be, and it will act like a keel to Parliament. Parliament has shown that the big party politics, majority government doesn't work. They just argue and block each other in the Senate and so on. A keel in the middle of Parliament, like you have the likes of Kerryn Phelps, the likes of Cathy McGowan, the likes of Andrew Wilkie. These are sensible, centrist people who look to deliver for their nation, because they don't get ministerial positions. They want to deliver for their communities. Now, this will be a ballast to the ship of state. And I think it works. I've seen it work overseas in Norway. I've seen it work in other countries. This works really well because you can chip off the excesses of the big parties. And the big parties have their excesses. We've seen the ridiculous donor, the foreign donor influence on our parties. That needs to be flushed out.
How will you play the game of setting preferences?
Well, I'm not going to play the preference game, Ross. I'm going to do as I've been guided to do through Tony Windsor. Tony Windsor won both state and federal elections by saying, you know what, the honest thing to do is to say vote one for me and then apply people's own preferences to the rest of the boxes. So I'm not going to advise people how to vote. If they like one side of politics or the other or a minor party, go for it. But I'll be advocating for myself, and I'm in fact asking the other parties to advocate for themselves. And don't play silly preference games with others. Put yourself one, put your platform forward, put your competence forward and let the electorate decide.
In recent times you've emerged as something of an underdog here in the race for Robertson.
Yep.
What do you attribute that to?
The Labor and Liberal Party don't have a plan for the Central Coast. They may have a plan for the nation, but they don't have one for the Central Coast. I have a Central Coast comprehensive plan, 18 policy points. I've worked with the community for 3 years on this, and it's a proper thing. Now, of course, that gives me underdog status because it's totally different. You know, it's a different style of politics. But as I said before, a definition of insanity is just keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. You're not going to get a different outcome if you go and do, if we vote in a similar parliament that we have over the last 12 years. It ain't going to work. So I'm the underdog. I like to, every morning I woke up and I watch the videos. Ross, I watched the video of Stephen Bradbury winning that gold medal, and it gives me a bit of hope. So some people like to claim that, but hey, these two front runners might just fall over and I might just skate in for a win. Let's hope.
David Abrahams, thank you for answering our questions this morning. We wish you well in the upcoming election, as we do with all the candidates, so good luck.
Okay, thank you.